The Loneliness of Perfect Worlds, Episode 27. If reality itself become unstable, if memory, truth, and identity become negotiable, then eventually science fiction asks one final emotional question. What happens when humanity survives, advances, and perfects its system, but still feel profoundly alone? This is the Sci-Fi Griot. I'm your host, Nicholas Cunningham. Over the last several episodes, we've explored humanity inside technological futures. What makes someone human? Memory or identity? Community or loneliness? Morality and automation? Transcendence, obsolecy, reality itself. And now we arrive at one of science fiction quietest fears, not extinction, emptiness. Because many futuristic worlds in science fiction are not collapsing, they function. The system works, technology advances, violence decreases, efficiency improves, and people survive. And yet, something feels emotionally hollow, loneliness, detached, spiritually exhausted. Science fiction keep returning to this image, a technologically advanced civilization filled with isolated people. Not because humanity disappears, because humanity becomes emotionally fragmented. That idea matters deeply because modern culture often assumes that progress naturally creates fulfillment, more convenience, more access, more comfort, more control. But science fiction repeatedly challenges those assumptions. It asks, what if human beings need more than optimized existence? What if efficiency cannot replace meaning? What if simulation cannot replace belonging? What if comfort cannot replace purpose? What if connection cannot replace intimacy? What if endless entertainment cannot replace wonder? Science fiction understands something ancient. Human beings are not only rational creatures, they are emotional, relational, and spiritual creatures. And when civilization neglect those dimensions, people may survive physically while deteriorating internally. That's why so many science fiction futures feel emotionally cold. Not because technology itself destroys humanity, but because systems increasingly organize life around productivity, convenience, optimization, control, consumption, while neglecting grief, vulnerability, transcendence, ritual, community, purpose. And perhaps the deepest fear beneath all of this is not technological domination, it's emotional numbness. A future where humanity gradually loses all or intimacy, emotional resilience, meaningful connection, the ability to sit with silence, loss, or uncertainty. Science fiction asks, can a civilization survive materially while collapsing emotionally? And again, the genre answers yes. That's where we're headed today. Not toward destruction, but toward loneliness. The loneliness of worlds that solve many external problems while forgetting that human beings emotionally need to flourish. The film Her may be one of the most emotionally accurate science fiction films ever made because its future is not violence. It is soft, beautiful, quiet, comfortable, and deeply lonely. People move through the world constantly connected to devices, voices, and systems, yet genuine intimacy feels increasingly rare. Theodore's loneliness is subtle. He functions, He works, communicates, participates in society, but emotionally, he is drifting. And science fiction understands this kind of loneliness well. Not isolation from people, isolation from meaningful vulnerability. The world of her reduces friction constantly. Technology becomes emotionally responsive, adaptive, attentive, and because of that, human relationships begin feeling more difficult by comparison, messier, slower, less predictable. That matters enormously because intimacy often develops through misunderstanding, patience, repair, sacrifice, emotional persistence. Themes optimized systems struggle to replicate authentically. And perhaps that is one of the film's deepest warning. Convenience can accidentally weaken emotional endurance. People begin expecting relationship to feel seamless, but real human connection rarely works that way. Science fiction keep reminding us the removal of discomfort is not the same thing as emotional fulfillment. And the film Her ends not with hatred toward technology, but with sadness. The realization that emotional connection cannot survive entirely through personalized alone. We returned to Wall E several times during this arch because beneath the charm, it contains one of science fiction's most important emotional critiques. Humanity survived, but it no longer feels fully alive. The humans aboard the Aximum is not suffering constantly. They are entertained, fed, protected, comfortable, and yet they appear emotionally diminished, disconnected from the natural world, physical experience, one another, meaningful participation. Science fiction understands that comfort alone does not create flourishing. People need purpose. People need challenge. They need contribution, wonder, and relationship. Without those things, existence can become passive. That passively matter because emotional numbness often develop gradually, not through catastrophic, through endless convenience, through the system that increasingly remove effort, dependent responsibility, and embodied experience. And eventually, human beings stop practicing many of these things that once made them emotionally resilient. Science fiction keep warning us a future optimized only for comfort may slowly erode curiosity, courage, emotional depth, community, and engagement with reality itself. That's why the smallest moments in Wall E feels revolutionary. Touch, wonder, looking directly at the sky, choosing movement, choosing relationship. The film quietly insists humanity is not sustained merely by survival. It is sustained through participation in life itself. In the film Brave New World remains one of the most important science fiction warning ever written because its society is not built primarily on violence. It's built on emotional management. People are conditioned for stability, consumption, pleasure, and predictability. The uncomfortable emotions are suppressed quickly. Sadness, longing, grief, existential uncertainty. Everything disruptive is minimized. At first, that may sound appealing. A society without suffering, without instability, without emotional chaos. But science fiction notices something terrifying. The elimination of emotional pain also weakens depth. It weakens individuality, longing, transcendent, and authentic connection because emotional complexity is deeply connected to humanity. People become more controllable when emotional life is flattened. This is one of the science fiction oldest warning. Systems often prefer emotionally manageable population. not necessarily through oppression, but through sedation, entertainment, consumption, pleasure without reflection. And Brave New World asks a devastating question. What if humanity eventually trade emotional depths for stability? Would people even notice what they lost? That question feels increasingly modern because technologically advanced society often struggle with emotional exhaustion, overstimulation, distraction culture, avoidance of discomfort, the inability to tolerate silence or uncertainty. Science fiction understands this deeply. People need more than just happiness. They need meaning, and meaning often emerges through struggle, grief, longing, sacrifice, and emotional vulnerability. Things perfectly managed societies try to minimize. At its core, Blade Runner 2049 is not only about identity, it's also about loneliness. Kay moves through a world filled with advertisement, artificial intimacy, synthetic interaction, and crowded isolation. And underneath all of it is an arching desire. That desire is to matter, not to society, but to someone. That distinction matters. Science fiction repeatedly suggests that human beings can endure difficult futures if meaningful connections survive. But emotionally empty futures become unbearable. Kay's relationship with Joy is tragic because it exposes how desperately people seek recognition, affirmation, intimacy, and emotional safety, even if those experiences are partially manufactured. And science fiction asks, what happened when emotional stimulation become easier to access than vulnerable human relationship? That question is increasingly relevant because modern systems already monetize attention, emotional attachment, identity validation, and social belonging. And yet, many people today still feel profoundly lonely. Science fiction understands why. Human beings do not simply need stimulation, they need mutuality to know that they are seen, that they are known, that they are remembered. Their existence changes another person's life meaningful. Without that, advanced civilization may still feel emotionally barren. One of the most interesting contrasts in science fiction is between optimistic futures like Star Trek and emotionally fragmented futures like cyberpunk. Both worlds contain advanced technology, but emotionally they feel completely different. Don't you think about it? Why? Because Star Trek imagines technology supporting human flourishing. People still gather, debate, mentor, form community, and pursue meaningful beyond consumption. The future remains relational. Cyberpunk future, on the other hand, often portray hyper individualism, corporate isolation, emotional fragmentation, commodified identity, overstimulation, loneliness inside crowded system. Technology exists in abundance, but shared meaning weaken. That contrast matters enormously. Science fiction keep insisting technology alone does not determine emotional health, but values do. What society prioritize matters. Do systems encourage cooperation? Do they encourage care? Do they encourage reflection? Do they encourage belonging or emotional resilience? Or do they encourage consumption? Do they encourage isolation, endless distraction, optimization without meaning? Science fiction repeatedly suggests that civilization become emotionally sustainable not through technological advancement alone, but through preserving community, ritual, purpose, moral imagination, and shared humanity. Science fiction treats loneliness as more than an individual emotion. It treats it as a societal condition. And that matters because emotionally disconnected population become vulnerable in many ways. Loneliness increases despair, tribalism, susceptibility to manipulation, emotional exhaustion, loss of meaning, and technologically advanced society can accidentally intensify those conditions through fragmentation, constant stimulation, a weakened local community, transactional interaction, algorithmic isolation. Science fiction understands this deeply. People require belonging. They require shared identity, emotional continuity, embodied presence, mutual care. Without those things, people may survive materially while deteriorating psychologically and spiritually. That is why so many futuristic stories feel emotionally haunted, not because humanity disappeared, but because people no longer know how to belong to one another deeply. So, after all these stories, what conclusion does science fiction keep returning to? Human flourishing requires more than efficient system. People need purpose, intimacy, wonder, moral responsibility, emotional resilience, community, opportunities for sacrifice and care, connecting to something larger than themselves. And importantly, many of those things cannot be fully optimized. That's why science fiction often distrusts perfect system, because system designed solely around comfort, consumption, efficiency, emotional management may unintentionally weaken the condition that allow people to thrive emotionally. Science fiction keep asking, what kind of future preserves humanity emotional depth? Not merely its survival, and perhaps the answer is surprisingly simple. A future where people still need one another, remember one another, care for one another, sacrifice for one another, remain emotionally awake to suffering and beauty. Because humanity is not sustained through system alone, it is sustained through relationship. The fear beneath many perfect futures is not oppression, it is emptiness. The possibility that humanity may eventually create safe worlds, efficient worlds, optimized world, technologically advanced world that still fail to nourish wonder, meaning, emotional intimacy, and spiritual depth. Science fiction keep warning us a civilization can become materially successful while becoming emotionally starved. And perhaps that is why so many futuristic stories return to very small human moments, like a conversation, a handheld, someone choosing to stay, someone grieving honestly, someone caring about transaction. Because those moments resist emotional collapse. They remind us of what flourishing actually feels like. So, what is the loneliness of perfect worlds? Science fiction answer is hauntingly consistent. It is the emotional emptiness that emerges when civilizations solve external problems while neglecting internal human needs. When systems become advanced, but people become disconnected, when comfort replaces purpose, when stimulation replaces wonder, when optimization replaces intimacy. And perhaps that's why so many science fiction stories ultimately return not to technology but to relationship. Because humanity survived emotionally through connection, vulnerability, memory, meaning, shared struggle, and care. Things that no perfect system has ever fully replaced. And maybe that completes this phase of the sci fi griot. We begin by asking what makes someone human? And along the way, science fiction keep bringing us back to the same answer. Not intelligence alone, not efficiency, not technological power. It's the ability to care, remember, sacrifice, remain emotionally present, pursue truth, build meaning together, even in uncertain futures. Because the greatest danger in science fiction is rarely the machine, it is the possibility that humanity slowly forgets what human flourishing actually requires. This has been a Sci Fi Griot, a place to slow down, to reflect, and to imagine futures where human beings remain emotionally alive. And my closing thought: if a future offered safety, comfort, endless entertainment, and perfect convenience, but slowly weakened intimacy, wonder, emotional depth, meaningful connection, would humanity still truly flourish? And what kind of relationships would remain protected for the future to feel worth living in?